తెలంగాణ గాయాలు మానలేరు ఒరి నాయన ఎందుకు ఇట్లయిందిరో తెలంగాణ గాయాలు మానలేరు ఒరి నాయన ఎందుకు వీరగాథలు పాడ
संकल्प सभा मन शर्मिला गर्जिंचे महासभा
రాజకీయ అరంగేట్రంపై ఇప్పటివరకు అందరిలో నెలకొన్న
షర్మిలను కలుసుకున్నారు. షర్మిలకు ఆశీర్వాదాన్ని అందిస్తున్నారు. ఘన స్వాగతం పలికారు. ఖమ్మం సంకల్ప సభకు వెళ్తున్నటువంటి షర్మిల అభివాదం ఇక్కడ ఉన్నటువంటి అభిమానులకు అభివాదం చేస్తున్నటువంటి దృశ్యాలను ప్రస్తుతం మనం చూస్తున్నాం.
మాస్కులు అందరూ పెట్టుకోవాలి. పక్కనే అందరూ కూడా శానిటైజర్ ఉన్నది. 10-20 నిమిషాలకు ఒక్కసారి శానిటైజ్ కూడా చేసుకోండి, చేతులు శుభ్రం చేసుకోండి. మాస్కులు పెట్టుకోవాల్సిందిగా మనవి చేస్తా ఉన్నాను. ప్లీజ్ స్టేజ్ మీద ఉన్న వాళ్ళందరూ కూడా. జోహార్ జోహార్ జోహార్.
जी विजयलक्ष्मी
వాళ్ళు వేసున్న ఎంఆర్పీలో సగం కూడా ఉండదు. లలిత జ్యువెలరీ 11 నెలల పథకంలో ఫస్ట్ ఇన్స్టాల్మెంట్ ఫ్రీ, తరుగులో 50% ఫ్రీ. లలిత జ్యువెలరీ.
హాట్‌స్టార్ విఐపిలో
అర్చికా గోల్డ్ కంపెనీకి రండి. అర్చికా గోల్డ్ కంపెనీ మీ బంగారు నగలను ఆ రోజు ఆన్లైన్ రేటుకే కొని ఒకే నిమిషంలో మీకు డబ్బిచ్చేస్తారు.
అర్చికా గోల్డ్ కంపెనీ.
వెల్కమ్ బ్యాక్. ఉత్కంఠభరిత మ్యాచ్లు, స్వదేశీ విదేశీ స్టార్ల బ్యాటింగ్ విన్యాసాలు. నిన్నటి వరకు ప్రత్యర్థులుగా ఉన్నవాళ్లు ఇప్పుడు సహచరులు, కలిసి ఆడిన ఆటగాళ్లు ఇప్పుడు ప్రత్యర్థులు. వెరసి ప్రపంచ క్రికెట్లోనే అతిపెద్ద క్రికెట్ వినోదం ఐపీఎల్కి మరికొన్ని గంటల్లోనే తెరలేవనుంది. మరో 2 నెలల పాటు అభిమానులకు T20 పండుగే.
ఐపీఎల్ T20 ఫెస్టివల్ కు మరికొద్ది గంటల్లోనే తెరలేవబోతోంది. ఆరంభ మ్యాచ్ డిఫెండింగ్ ఛాంపియన్ ముంబై ఇండియన్స్ రాయల్ ఛాలెంజర్స్ బెంగళూరు తలపడనున్నాయి. 5 సార్లు టైటిల్ గెలిచిన ముంబైని ఫేవరెట్గా చెబుతున్నప్పటికీ విధ్వంసర ఆటగాళ్లతో ఉన్న ఆర్సీబీని తేలిగ్గా తీసుకోలేని పరిస్థితి. దీంతో తొలి మ్యాచ్ హోరాహోరీగా సాగడం ఖాయంగా కనిపిస్తోంది. ఐపీఎల్ సీజన్ ప్రారంభానికి ముందే ముంబై ఇండియన్స్ దే టైటిల్ అన్న అభిప్రాయం కనిపిస్తుందంటే ఆ జట్టు ఏ స్థాయిలో బలంగా ఉందో అర్థం చేసుకోవచ్చు. ఆరంభంలో తడబడి
Your lecturer is Hayden J. Bellanoit. Dr. Bellanoit is an associate professor of history at the U.S. Naval Academy, where he teaches courses on South Asian history, ranging from the Mughals to contemporary Pakistan. He completed his Doctor of Philosophy in Modern History at Oxford University, focusing on comparative religious scholarship between Hindu reformists and Christian missionary scholars in late colonial India. While studying at Oxford, Dr. Bellanoit spent a year in India conducting research. He has researched and published extensively on modern Indian religious, social, and cultural history.
India, one of the world's oldest civilizations. India has given humanity the fraction, decimals, the process of woven cloth for clothing, and one of its best-known figures, Gandhi. Yet between the mid-1700s and 1947, this great civilization fell to the rule of a seemingly insignificant foggy island off the northwestern Eurasian landmass. But British rule profoundly affected India's religious traditions, society, and indeed languages spoken. It was the single most valuable colony for any empire in history. So there's a lot to cover in this course. And because it's a region of the world with which most people aren't familiar, we're going to spend this first lecture covering some basics about religion and society. This is so we can hit the treadmill running, so to speak. So think of this lecture as India 101. We're going to look at two major themes here. First, we're going to examine Hinduism, looking at its basic structure and how it emerged over hundreds, thousands of years. And secondly, we'll look at the traditions of caste and how families and societies function in India. When we step back, the broader lesson from this lecture is for us to understand how Indian society functions, what Hinduism and caste are, and the impact of Islamic rule in India before the British arrived there. The story we're going to tell is, of course, a very modern one. It's about the impact of British colonial rule. Yet it's also about the adaptability and resilience of Indian society and India's cultural, religious, and spiritual traditions. It's indeed a history of which every Indian should be very proud. Let's first turn to some of the major geographic regions of India, and we'll go through each one. Now, when studying any new, unfamiliar part of the world, knowing the lay of the land is a great way to understand a region's history, culture, and beliefs. First is the Gangetic Plain. Located in North India, it's one of the most fertile regions of the Indian subcontinent. It takes its name from the Ganges River, also known as the Ganga, which descends from the Himalayan mountains. It's one of the most fertile regions of India in terms of harvest and crop yields. Moving eastward, we're brought to the Bay of Bengal and the Bengal regions. With its vast network of marsh waterways, it's long been a center of maritime commerce and exchange, with strong links to Southeast Asia and indeed the broader commercial maritime world. It's perhaps no surprise that this was the first region of India to fall to British rule. Let's now move to the south, to the Deccan Plateau. This plateau covers the southern torso of the Indian subcontinent. Though verdant in some regions, it is mostly dry and harsh. Its mountains and riverways have actually historically prevented outsiders from fully militarily conquering it from the north. Moving up to the western coast of India, we get to the Thar Desert near the current Indian-Pakistani border. It looks more like a scene from Arabia with camels, but the people and customs are decidedly Indian. Moving up along the western parts of India, we get to the Indus River region, which consists itself of two subregions. The first is Sindh, at the southern mouth of the Indus River. Second, and farther north, is the Punjab, which comes from the Persian for 5 waters, referring to the 5 tributaries from the Himalayas that enter into the Indus River, which then empties into the Arabian Sea. Moving farther northwest, we get to the famed Khyber Pass, a narrow transit route through mountains which straddle the border between modern Afghanistan and Pakistan. The Khyber Pass traditionally has been the transit route for invaders, Muslim sultans, the Mughals, and Akbar. It was the key link between India and the Islamic Middle East. Now that we've gotten a lay of the land, let's move on to an overview of Hinduism. Hinduism is one of the world's great religious traditions, but it's difficult to define exactly what Hinduism is. I could teach a whole course on Hinduism, but for the purposes of this course, we're going to have to do a more condensed version. Hinduism is a religion, philosophy, and cosmology, all rolled into one. It's as much a way of life as it is a religious system. Unlike the 3 Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, Hinduism has no single founder. It's the accumulation of various practices, adaptations, and local customs wrapped into a broader tradition that has been largely located in the Indian subcontinent. Now, let's go into some of Hinduism's basics. We like to think of religions as either monotheistic or polytheistic, but Hinduism defies either categorization. While it has over 3,000 larger and lesser deities, it does believe in a supreme creator. So the best description of Hinduism would be henotheistic, meaning that there's one supreme being or central divinity, but at the same time, there are multitudes of other lesser gods and goddesses. The understanding is that since humans are limited in their perception of the cosmos and the divine, different people who have different ethnicities, cultures, and views will all see God in very different ways. There's an old allegory that since humans are all limited in what we can understand about the divine, we're all blindfolded. And if we're reaching for the same elephant, for example, we're going to see it and feel it differently. For example, if you touch the whiskers, you might think that the divine is gentle. If you get hit by the elephant's heel, you'll think God's vengeful. If you happen to end up next to the elephant's poo, well, you might be a cynical nihilist. The allegory is used to illustrate how Hinduism views revelation and truth in religion. It generally accepts that all paths go to the same end, that is God. This logically to Hinduism explains the diversity of the world's religions. Or, as an old saying goes, God is one, but wise people know him by many names. Now, Hinduism is as much a religion as it is a philosophy. And this is unlike Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which have traditionally separated religion and faith from philosophy and metaphysics. But in Hinduism, religion and philosophy are not separated. They are one and the same. So, partially because of this, Hinduism has no real set of rules or doctrine. It's not about faith and confession. It has no central textual source of adjudication. It usually doesn't say, you can't do this, you can't do that. If anything, it's somewhat vague on moral guidelines and specifics. It's more focused on wider, holistic understandings of existence, life, and duty. Hinduism also tolerates evil as a part of life and natural existence. Now, this doesn't mean that Hindus condone evil behavior. Quite the opposite. But it does mean that there's less of a tendency to confront a perceived evil. This is very different compared to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. In those three traditions, when faced with a perceived evil, one is generally compelled, in various ways, to combat it. Hinduism also has no real concept of blasphemy. It has no dichotomy between the sacred and the profane. But this doesn't mean that Hindus don't respect religious rite and ritual and sensitivities. There's just no doctrinal altar of punishment. But Hinduism does have ancient traditions and texts. The main one is called the Rig Veda. Composed between roughly 2000 and 1500 BC, it's a collection of hymns in Sanskrit, the oldest of the Indo-European languages. It contains about 1,023 hymns devoted to everything from creation to the gods and the cosmos. The origins of the Rig Veda and Sanskrit lie in the so-called Aryan peoples of Central Asia and southern Russia. These semi-nomadic peoples started coming into India from the northwest after roughly 2000 BC. They brought with them the sacred language of Sanskrit and a pantheon of nature gods whom they called Devas, or Shining Ones. Now, the Vedic pantheon is associated largely with forces in nature. Some examples include Dios Pitar, the sky god, Agni, the fire god, and Indra, the warrior god. So if we compare it, the Vedic pantheon is actually very similar to those of Greece, Rome, and the Nordic peoples. And like all ancient pantheons, the gods demanded sacrifice. Hinduism early on acquired what we would call a sacrificial cult, and this was crucial. Sacrifices had to be made to the gods, and they usually consisted of animals, fruits, cereals, ghee, and milk. Now think about it. Why were sacrifices offered? Well, of course, to please the gods. the wealthiest in the world by any measure, would soon fall into a form of decay and decline. Machinery went into the Indian countryside for the single greatest source of wealth, for the symbolic legitimacy that lasted until the mid-19th. The wealth of India in the 19th century, where the British would establish
books, including a physical chemistry textbook and a book.
We've modified matter and contact lenses to make you look like a cat. We have reusable sticky notes and protective tiles that keep spacecraft from burning up when they re-enter the atmosphere. How do we get all of that out of the universe around us? Well, it's all about
ఖమ్మం ఎంట్రన్స్ అయ్యేసరికి కూడా
జుంబకు 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 బాల జుంబకు జుంబకు జుం జుంబకు 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 బాల జుంబకు జుంబకు జుం వంపులు తిరుగుతుం అహం కొండలాడి కొని కొండల మింగే కొండ సిలువల కూరలు చూడు.
various energies. a state of the same element. Continuous. And for the most part, it acts like it's continuous too. But when scientists started doing careful experiments with matter in the 1800s, they found that the only way to explain their results was if matter came in discrete but tiny pieces.